For a long time, the most prolific animation studio on television was Hanna-Barbera. They truly shaped what was possible in animated television series and have left quite a legacy with the several characters they brought to airwaves. But what makes their work so appealing and endearing? Before jumping to television, William Hanna and Joseph Barbera had already made a name for themselves on theatrical animated shorts, namely at MGM, where they would create the iconic duo Tom and Jerry. They created a formula with that cat and mouse, which would prove successful, and their penchant for utilizing formulas like that would become a major part of their careers in television. When MGM shut down their shorts unit, Hanna-Barbera saw potential in this new medium. Their first show was the Rough and Ready show, where you already see the hallmarks of their television output. The animation lacked the fluidity of the MGM cartoons, but they sought to make up for that with appealing character designs, likable personalities with pleasant cartoon voices, and clever writing. They immediately latched onto voice actors like Dawes Butler, Don Messick, and Mel Blanc to help further endear these characters to viewers. Characters like Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, Quick Draw McGraw, and Top Cat had easily identifiable personalities that found comedic situations out of their specific works, whether it was Yogi trying to get a picnic basket or Top Cat pulling a scheme of some kind. Hanna-Barbera also wanted these shows to have a sophistication in the writing that would give them equal respect to their live-action counterparts, and I think that's one reason Yogi, Huckleberry, and the others remain appealing to this day. Although that simple animation style has become a sticking point for many, with Chuck Jones even dismissively referring to it as illustrated radio. However, I think there's a beauty and charm to that style that does not get enough credit. So while it was partly born out of the budget constraints placed on television animation at the time, Hanna-Barbera and the artists still tried to find humor through reaction shots and the characters' amusing running cycles. Even things like characters driving past the same background over and over again has a certain oddball charm to it. Awao Takamoto, a Disney animator who would later design several characters for Hanna-Barbera, even preferred to call it planned animation rather than limited animation, while Genndy Tartakovsky has referred to it as controlled animation. Of course, Hanna-Barbera's biggest contribution to television animation is the Flintstones, the first primetime animated television series that took a sitcom premise and placed it in the Stone Age, and while it relied heavily on rock puns, the writing was nonetheless incredibly funny, and the Flintstones and Rubbles at the center of it were delightful characters. Bedrock felt like an actual society, and the way they transplanted modern appliances to cave people times did show a lot of invention. While it was basically the honeymooners to the point Jackie Gleason considered suing Hanna-Barbera, the Flintstones still worked on its own charms, and despite being made in the 60s, many of its elements still hold up as we see Fred go to work at his quarry and get into scrapes with his best friend Barney Rubble. They would repeat the formula again with the Jetsons, this time focusing on a family living in the future. However, that show is not necessarily a repeat of the Flintstones, despite similar elements. I think a large reason for the Jetsons' appeal is this wonderment of the possibilities of the future, and while several predictions were pure fantasy, there was technology they got somewhat right, like video conferencing and vacuum cleaning robots. Admittedly, Hanna-Barbera did eventually become a factory of mass-produced animated shows, mostly focused on a wacky talking animal, although they would mix things up with action shows like Johnny Quest and even the Banana Splits variety show. One particularly inspired series was Wacky Races, which created an intrigue in who would win the race in the end, although I think viewers would mostly tune in to see the antics of Dick Dastardly and Muttley. The end of the 60s would also bring about Scooby-Doo or Are You, centered on a group of crime-solving teenagers and a hungry talking dog. While the episodes were repetitive, only minor variations in settings and monsters who were really people in disguise, it's understandable why these adventures would become immensely popular and launch a franchise that's still going on today. Again, the characters were easily identifiable with simple catchphrases that would enter the public lexicon, and the mystery aspect and spooky atmosphere gave the show a certain edge. However, when Hanna-Barbera hit upon a show or characters that were successful, they sure managed to milk them for several years. They would control a lot of the Saturday morning schedule with several spin-offs of the Flintstones, Yogi Bear, Wacky Races, and especially Scooby-Doo. While the writers still put their all into making these entertaining to viewers, they nonetheless felt churned out. With that said, they are important parts of the legacy of these characters, and inspiration would strike on occasion. I think one of the most important writers to come to Hanna-Barbera was Tom Ruegger. He would attempt to spice up the Scooby-Doo formula in particular with the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, and especially a pup named Scooby-Doo. Animated shows about younger versions of cartoon characters were plentiful in the 80s, with HB responsible for a number of them. But a pup named Scooby-Doo had a certain bounce and self-aware quality that made it stand out from the pack. Even the animation felt different. A lot of the elements Ruegger would bring to his shows at Warner Brothers Animation are very much felt here. Hanna-Barbera also scored a big get when they produced a show based on Peyo's Smurfs characters. They were not the first licensed characters handled by Hanna-Barbera, as they previously produced shows based on DC and Marvel comics. However, there was an incredible charm to the inhabitants of Smurf Village and a lot of comic potential as they dealt with the evil Gargamel trying to catch them. The Smurfs went back to what made Hanna-Barbera so appealing in the first place, which was an understanding of how to bring to life well-drawn characters with personalities that stood out. I think what helped give Hanna-Barbera a kick in the pants in the 90s was when the studio in its library was purchased by Turn Entertainment. In addition to their already existing shows airing on Cartoon Network, there was a desire to create new, exciting programming, especially with Disney successfully entering the television animation arena in the 80s and the rise of Nickelodeon in their original shows. A lot of credit goes to Fred Seibert, who looked for fresh young talent with their own ideas not too dissimilar to what Nickelodeon was doing. While you had the occasional creator like Joe Ruby and Ken Spears who injected some of their own personality into a show like Scooby-Doo, most of the series produced by Hanna-Barbera up to that point were not ones driven by a specific artist or writer aside from, well, Hanna and Barbera. That would change in the 90s, with Donovan Cook's Two Stupid Dogs being an early example. Furthermore, you had artists like Genndy Tartakovsky, Craig McCracken, and David Feiss being allowed to develop their own unique concepts. Dexters Laboratory was particularly infused with Tartakovsky's own love for the things he grew up watching as a young Russian immigrant to America, had a brilliant premise of a hyper-intelligent boy with a secret lab, and was often hilarious. It was something different from Hanna-Barbera, although Tartakovsky was still inspired by those cartoons as well, particularly with the timing, sound effects, and the way the characters moved. Hanna-Barbera would eventually be absorbed into Warner Brothers Animation, but it's telling that WB still tries to find ways to utilize those characters. Although it's mostly been Scooby-Doo they produce new series and movies with, new material, the Flintstones and Yogi Bear pop up on occasion. So why do the Hanna-Barbera characters continue to appeal so many years after they were created? I feel it's a combination of their designs, voices, and funny characterizations that keeps both nostalgic adults and even the next generation of children coming back to them. And while some of them were referencing specific pieces of pop culture, Hanna-Barbera made sure they at least stood out on their own. I did not know what the Honeymooners was as a child, but I still loved watching Fred Flintstone's antics with Wilma and Barney. I have so many fond memories of watching those cartoons as a child, and was always happy to see Yogi Bear, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and Top Cat on screen whenever I switched on the television. They had such winning personalities, and while the animation may not have been Disney quality, that was never something that bothered me. Their worlds were colorful and full of life, even when Yogi only moved his head when he talked. While the studio did have a lot of similar shows, it was easy to pick out your favorites of the bunch and gravitate towards those. By the way, while I did delve into the history of Hanna-Barbera in this video, if you really want a comprehensive overview of everything the studio accomplished, I recommend checking out 47 Cartoon Guy's 5-part retrospective. He put an enormous amount of research into it, and it's a fantastic exploration of William Hanna and Joseph Barbera's careers. To finish off, I now would like to know what your memories of Hanna-Barbera are, and what has specifically stood out to you personally about the series and characters they brought to television screens. See you next time.